The story of the serial-killing duo began just over 70 years ago in 1945. The elder of the pair, Leonard Lake, was born in the wake of World War II. Lake had a troubled childhood.
His family have got a history of working in the US Navy. They move around a lot. There's quite a lot of volatility in the family unit, quite a lot of drinking.
Age 6, Lake's parents separated, and he and his siblings were sent to live with their grandparents. There, his grandmother allegedly encouraged some lewd behaviour.
He, as a boy, had been encouraged by his grandmother to take naked pictures of his sisters. And I think that this gave him this fixation that meant that he was always, to some extent, wanted to manipulate women.
As a young man, Lake developed his own unhealthy urges.
Leonard Lake identified with a book by John Fowles called The Collector, which was written in 1963. And basically, the story of The Collector was a clerk called Frederick Clegg. He collected butterflies. And for some reason, suddenly developed a fixation on a girl called Miranda, and decides to abduct Miranda so that she becomes part of his butterfly collection.
Lake becomes obsessed with having women as his sex slaves, keeping women in an enclave that he's going to develop because he's going to survive a nuclear Armageddon.
In 1965, aged 19, Lake joined the US Marine Corps and served 2 tours in the Vietnam War as a radar operator.
I think it tipped him over the edge, the possibility that he would find himself in close combat fighting, and essentially snapped. And that was the genesis of the man that became really a ferocious killer.
In 1971, Lake was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder and was given a medical discharge. He re-emerged in San Francisco, where he began to explore his dark fantasies.
He married in San Francisco in 1975. His wife finally couldn't stand him because he made amateur porn films. A lot of sadomasochism, a lot of bondage. His wife was very upset by that and effectively threw him out.
In 1977, still in the San Francisco Bay Area, Lake met his second wife. Nicknamed Cricket, she indulged his peculiar habits.
Cricket was an active participant in his, again, amateur porn films and appeared in many of them.
This is the thing about abusive men like Leonard Lake. They're not abusive all of the time. They're able to charm, they're able to manipulate, they're able to spin a good story to people who they want to support them.
15 years younger, Charles Ng seemed an unlikely choice for a friend.
Charles Ng was born in Hong Kong in 1960, the son of a wealthy Chinese businessman, a harsh disciplinarian. One of Ng's releases was to be a kleptomaniac. He stole things. He stole things because it made him feel better about himself. And he did it repeatedly.
Aged 15, Ng was sent to a boarding school in England, but it did not go well.
Charles Ng's family were consistently embarrassed by him, so he was moved around from school to school. He ended up at a boarding school in Yorkshire, where he carried on with this behaviour. He did academically well for a while, so he was a child who was quite bright. But he just couldn't help himself in terms of stealing and create all of this chaos, and I think he was quite enjoying that.
In 1978, aged 18, Ng moved to the US on a student visa. He moved to California to study, but he soon got into trouble again. He was involved in a hit and run. In October 1979, aged 18, Charles Ng was arrested and forced to pay for the damages. Then, in a strange twist, a year later, the Hong Kong resident and British citizen lied about his nationality and joined the US Marine Corps. But less than a year after he joined, old habits resurfaced.
In 1982, when by this time Ng was 22, he was arrested for stealing explosives and weaponry.
Ng was sentenced to 14 years in military detention in Hawaii. It was while he was in jail that Ng formed an uncommon friendship with Leonard Lake. Charles Ng moved into Lake's new remote ranch in the northern Californian wilderness.
It was the combination of the two individuals that made them into the terrible killing machine that they became.
Here, Lake and Ng shared their depraved fantasies, and together they devised a fearsome plan to murder men, women, and even infants on an industrial scale. On the grounds of the 2-acre property, Lake had built a subterranean bunker for his and his partner Ng's murderous purpose.
In Calaveras County, east of San Francisco, where, effectively, Lake set up the dungeon that he'd always wanted for his Operation Miranda, where Ng came to join him.
Based on Lake's obsession with the book The Collector, the pair teamed up to put Leonard Lake's fearsome fantasy, his so-called Miranda plan, into motion.
The Miranda plan was the means by which he was going to be the one who fathered all the new children in the world after the nuclear Armageddon had happened and he was in his enclave with all of his sex slaves.
That's what he was creating with Ng, and that's what he had been fantasizing for 20 years before he met Ng. The project's aim is to capture your ideal woman, enslave her, and have her be your sexual slave until you're done with her, at which time you kill her. In the case of Ng and Lake, the killings involve much more than killings, much more than just sex. They involve torture, they involve the photographing of victims. It was a nightmare that somebody from Hollywood could not dream up for a horror movie.
Ng arrives, and in a sense, they combust the fantasy, because they start saying to each other, what we need is to have lots of children to repopulate the world and make better citizens, a kind of a social engineering project through a very odd prism.
Ng was a very shy person who himself could not have done this, but happily joined the venture so that he would have a chance of the kind of sexuality his shyness made impossible.
On July the 25th, 1984, Lake and Ng's perverse Miranda plan was begun. The first woman they were thought to have abducted and enslaved was Deborah Dubbs. The duo would in fact murder her, her husband Harvey, and their 16-month-old son Sean. Answering an ad for video equipment, Lake and Ng showed up at their apartment in San Francisco. The pair likely killed Harvey and the baby soon after. Lake and Ng then kidnapped 33-year-old Deborah and took her back to their underground bunker.
In the case of the Dubbs family, they took all of their photographic equipment. Mr. Dubbs used to do photography work on the side. They abducted his wife and raped her.
In Wilseyville, in Calaveras County, Lake and Ng kept Deborah prisoner. In what would become their modus operandi, the callous killing team would torture, defile, and humiliate Deborah. In all, the team gathered 45 pounds of charred remains. They belonged to at least 11 victims killed in the 11-month spree, including 6 men, 3 women, and 2 babies. All had been identified.
Ng and Lake, one of the most unusual things is that they were said to have fed some of the remains of their victims to chickens, of all things. It actually makes a kind of perverse sense. If you've burnt a body, you're left mainly with bone, it can be ground up, and that's the sort of thing a chicken could eat.
Now that investigators knew about the terrible crimes that Lake and Ng had callously committed, they had to catch the fugitive serial killer, Charles Ng.
Ng leaves and runs, crosses the border into Canada, Calgary, and to where his sister lives.
Leonard Lake had committed suicide, but his serial killing partner Charles Ng was still alive, and detectives were now determined to catch him. It would not take long. Over 1,200 miles away, and less than a month after he fled San Francisco, Ng would succumb to his shoplifting urges once again. This time, it would lead to the serial killer's demise. July the 6th, 1985, Calgary, Canada. The net was closing in on Charles Ng.
Based upon information one of his associates had given to the FBI, we felt he probably had gone across the border up into Canada. So his picture was being distributed up there.
Now, Canada, the FBI has international offices in Canada, so when somebody like Ng flees there, the FBI can be on it fairly quickly.
Less than a month after he fled the San Francisco Bay Area, Charles Ng fatefully succumbed to one of his urges.
That strain of kleptomania that had run through his childhood didn't disappear in adulthood. And indeed, it was Ng's kleptomania that in the end saw him caught and brought to justice. And it's almost pathetic. He goes and he steals a can of salmon in a supermarket.
And a couple of store detectives approached him, and he was armed, and he pulled out his gun and shot one of the store clerks.
The security guard manages to hang on to him despite having been shot in the hand, and the police are called. Ng is taken, and then, almost immediately, they realise that they have the man that the American authorities want.